Hello friends, welcome once again to Rick's Garage. Today we're going to be replacing all 4 tie rod ends on this 2010 Ford Fusion. Before we begin, let's have a little safety moment as always. As you can see, I've got the car on jack stands. I've placed a jack beside the jack stand only for extra support. The jack is not holding the car, the jack stand is, but should by some unfortunate circumstance the jack stand fail, I've got the added protection of having a jack on each side. Also, I don't know how well you can see this, but I've got the rear wheels chalked and the emergency brake has been set. To start with, I'm going to do the passenger side first. I'm probably only going to show one side because the procedure is the same for both. Okay, to begin with, I've turned the wheel all the way to the left so that the tie rod assembly will be further out and closer to us and make it easier to work on. We're going to go ahead and try to remove the cotter pin. You notice I said try. Sometimes you can spend more time fiddling with these cotter pins than anything else. Well, I'm not going to struggle with that cotter pin. I'm just going to zip it off. We're going to replace these parts anyway. So, if you are going to use a tool like this, please put on your safety glasses. Okay, we made short work of that. I'm going to give this a shot of Croil. I think it's the best penetrating oil on the market. This nut is a 17 millimeter. Because mine is, don't mean that yours is. So it's probably the 17 or 18, possibly 19, but in this particular instance it's 17. And I apologize for the noise, but I'm just going to blast this thing right off. Alright, I'm going to give this knuckle a few taps, and hopefully that'll pop right out of there. There we go. Okay, so much for that. Before I undo the adjusting nut, what you're going to see me do here is I'm going to try to put a little notch in it. This is for the purpose of marking it so I can reassemble it on the bench for the purposes of measuring it. You'll see many people will take a tie rod end and count the turns when they remove it. I don't like to do that because you're assuming that the part you're replacing is absolutely identical to the part that was originally on the car, and sometimes that's not the case. This is what I'm going to attempt to do. I'm going to attempt to notch it so I can reassemble it on the bench. Okay, that ought to be sufficient. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to temporarily slip that stud from the tie rod end back into the knuckle to keep it from turning so I can have it stay in place while I try to loosen that nut. I put a vice grip there to keep it from slipping out. Now you may ask the question, why didn't I just simply undo that nut before I knocked the tie rod end out? The reason for that is I wanted it to droop down a little bit to make it easier to notch it for measuring. Once again, I'm going to spray a little coil on that to help it come off. Okay, this happens to be a 21 millimeter. Hopefully it won't be too difficult to remove. Well, it seemed to come off quite easily, not much more easily than I expected. Now we're going to see how easily we can spin this tie rod end out. It's always interesting working with a camera. You try to balance needing room to work and also giving your audience a decent view. So I hope I'm accomplishing that. Oh my God, that's turning very easily. Okay, so there's no problem there. We'll spin that right out. Rather than bore you with that, I'm going to go ahead off camera and spin that nut off and get it out of the way, and then the next thing we'll work on is removing the boot. Well, that nut came off quite easily, almost as easily as the tie rod end itself. So next we're going to remove this little clamp that holds the end of the boot on. I'm going to attempt to do that anyway. Oops. There. Wasn't so bad. All right. I don't know how well you can see this, but there's a clamp holding the large end of the boot on, and you can see there's a little right in there. There's a little loopy thing. I think I'm too close. It's not focused, but I'm going to try to drive a screwdriver into that little loopy thing and see if I can break that clamp. I've got this ridiculously long screwdriver, and I'm going to try to put it in there. And it seems to be going in, and it seems to be prying. There it is, and I broke it. So that wasn't so bad at all. I hope you saw it. Okay, so here we've got a knife, and we're trying to cut this. It's pretty tough stuff. There. Let's see if this will slide off a little easier now. Yep, there it is, it's off. Okay. And the old retaining ring, you get that. Okay. So now, to remove this, we have a special tool. This actually clamps onto the inner tie rod. You can turn it with a 3/8 drive socket. Let's see how this works. There we go. All right. Now that'll spin right out of there. As you recall, I put a notch on the tie rods before I disassembled them. Well, I've gone ahead and reassembled it on the bench, and I've lined up the notch exactly right down to the scratch mark. So this is the exact length that the tie rod assembly was when it was on the car. So now it's a simple matter of measuring it and making the new tie rod assembly exactly the same length. The new tie rod ends have grease fittings. These do not. So I put a little mark here where the grease fitting would have been. I'm measuring from the end of the tie rod end where it comes in contact with the rack and pinion to the center of the hole. And that's exactly 11 1/4. So that's what I'm going to set it to. 11 1/4. So this can be discarded now. What you see here is the new tie rod assembly on the bench. I've already off camera measured it to the exact length of the old tie rod assembly. As you recall, I used a grinding mark to reset the old tie rod assembly on the bench so I could get an accurate measurement. So I've gone ahead and made this to the correct length. Now I'm going to take a little file, I'm going to make a little mark. I don't want to make a heavy mark like I did on the last one with the grinder. I just want a little mark so I can identify the spot where the outer tie rod end will be screwed into. And I'm ready to put it back on the car. Before I put it back on the car though, I'm going to put a little dab of Loctite on these threads right here. The reason for that is just a little added measure of protection. You don't want this thing spinning out while you're driving. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and install this inner tie rod end off camera. I'm going to use the same method I used to loosen it. Once I got that installed, I'm going to go ahead and slip the new boot over it, and we'll pick up the video right from there. So it's pretty much from here, putting it back together the way we took it apart, and just lining up those two little notches I made for the tie rod assembly to give it the correct length. And it should be very, very close to the original alignment. You may not even need to align it. What I want to do right now is slip a zip tie over the end of the boot. Yeah, I think actually I want to put it this way because I've got some room to pull on it going that way. So let's get the zip tie over it. There we go. Slide it past that. There we go. We're getting there. I'm going to close it up a little bit. Not too much. Enough to get it to where I need it to be. There we go. Alright. Looks like I'm there. So now it's just a matter of pulling it tight. I can't get my finger in there to make sure it's where it needs to be. There it is. Is that where it needs to be all the way around? Yep. Alright. It's a little tool I got for tightening zip ties. Alright, I got our tool stuck. Let's see if we can get this tool around this axle. And there we go. That's working great. See, it's a special tool that tightens zip ties. I don't want to put it so tight that I break it. That's going nowhere now. Alright, so the boot clip is on. I did that off camera. The nut is all tightened up and locked in place. So it's just a matter of to slip the outer tie rod into the knuckle and install the castle nut. Also, don't forget to install your grease fittings if your tie rod ends are so equipped. Alright, so that's pretty much it. We're going to tighten up that castle nut, install the cotter pin, and we're pretty much done. So just repeat this procedure on the other side. One thing I might add is there was a little panel here that was kind of in the way that goes right in there. I took that out to give me a little more room to work, so you might want to move that out and put that back in when you get done. So we're going to call it this job done. Like I say, after I sign off, all I got to do is tighten up the castle nut and install the cotter pin, and we're done. And just repeat this exact same procedure for the other side. So I thank you very much for watching Rick's Garage, and once again we hope to see you next time.